A second here. Hello and welcome to Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series. My name is Logan Wolf, and I'm speaking to you from my office in Provo, Utah. My wife, Grayson, and I have been in Provo for almost 13 years now. 13 years will be this coming spring. And as I've shared before, our ministry during this time has taken all sorts of forms. We began as a mobile church, doing like a traditional church setup in the conference center of a hotel. We did that for 5 years before we merged with another ministry, absorbed them into our own, and became multi-site overnight. And so we had buildings and staff in 2 different counties and 2 different cities. We did that for just over 3 years before we realized we weren't making disciples very effectively. And so we offloaded that structure. And for the last almost 5 years now, January will be 5 years that we have been functioning as a network of house churches across the state of Utah. And so my goal with this podcast is to look back on those experiences from the mobile church, the multi-site, and even with the house church network. We are 5 years into it. And so we can look back on those things a little bit removed and discuss what I would do differently if I were to do all of it over again, knowing what I know now, if I were pursuing those same courses of methodology. And my goal is just to save you some of the heartache and frustration and headaches that we've gone through over the years, as well as just your time and your energy and your money as you're laboring or preparing to labor in your city. And what I've been doing even more recently in these last several episodes is bringing on some old friends, some new friends who are church planters in different parts of the country, different contexts, and having them share pieces of their story as well as what they would do differently in their own circumstances, their own situation. And that is the case today. I am joined by my friend Stephen Kimbrell, who is a church planter in Irvine, California, which is in the 6th most populated county in America, there in Orange County. I have known Stephen since college. Did not care for him too much in college, but he is a friend now, and I am so grateful for what he is doing out there in California. Stephen, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for that great introduction.
I was, as I was talking, I was like, oh yeah, I know Stephen from college. If you're listening, you've listened to previous episodes. I have mentioned our brother Amos laboring in Chula Vista, California. Amos actually went to California with Stephen, and then Stephen's church launched him south to start another church there in Chula Vista. And so man, it's so exciting when a church plant produces church planters. And so I know you're stoked by that, bro. And I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for Amos. But this is not a podcast about the things that went right. This is a podcast about the things that we would do differently, the mistakes that have been made. So, bro, why don't you maybe, again, for our audience, share a little bit of your story, as much as your faith journey that you feel is necessary, but particularly emphasizing your maybe moving towards church planting, and then how you landed there in California, a little bit what that context is like and what you're experiencing even right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I grew up very, very far from California. Culturally speaking, probably the furthest you can be in rural Alabama. And I grew up 2 miles down a dirt road on a farm. And, first of all, I feel like most people in the South they don't have a great view of California. So the fact that I ended up here is like really God's call. But long story short, I felt like I was called to preach at an early age, answered a call to preach, went to Bible college in North Carolina where you and I met my wife, and that was the same time in colleges where God first began to put on my heart the desire to plant churches. I think that's where I was really introduced to that concept, really probably through a professor that we had in college, and was very passionate about planting churches. I remember continuously saying, get out of the Bible Belt and go do something for Jesus, that kind of thing. And that was a challenge to me. I love the idea of starting new things, of being entrepreneurial, of
Mhm.
being kind of on the cutting edge of what God was doing. Just all appealed, I think, to me naturally, and to kind of some of the things God had placed in my heart. And so, actually, right out of college, helped someone plant a church in Pennsylvania for a short time. Moved back to North Carolina and worked there for a few years. And long story short, God began working on our heart about Irvine, California, which was through we came to California in 2011 for a wedding. Drove through the place, and that's when I just saw a city that was exploding with growth, started reading about it online, really thinking about it for someone else because it was a growing place. There were people moving here from all over the world, from China, from the Middle East. And I began to think, man, who do I know that I could recommend this place to? And, and I think sometimes God lets us think like that so that we're not ready to think like that for ourselves. and and then God began to turn that around on me, and it just began to put that on my heart, that this is the place for you. And it took a few years, honestly, but long story short, we came to the point, this is where we feel like God's calling us to go. Let our church know about it. We did some fundraising, a lot of fundraising actually, and had a team, recruited a team to be willing to move, and we had three families that miraculously agreed to come. And so we made that move out in 2015 and moved into Irvine. We're here for 11 months and working in the community, growing the launch team, building towards that launch day, and then launched in the fall of 2016. And so we've been going for 7 years now. And we're still, we meet in a junior high school. The name of our church is Grace City Church. We are It's such a different area than Millport, Alabama, where I grew up, where 976 people live. Um,
Wow.
it's I think Irvine, when we moved here, was 250,000. I think we're close to 350 now, and literally people from all over the world. And God's given us a really diverse church. We just on Sunday celebrated our international Thanksgiving meal, and it was so awesome. I mean, the spread was huge, and I mean, there was homemade sushi there. There's bulgogi. There's Indian food, and it just food from all over the world. And so,
And you've done that for several years now, right? That
yeah,
because I
yeah.
feel like I've seen pictures of that in the past. See, that's Provo is so homogenous, just a
Yeah.
white place. But that's so cool that you guys are able to do that. So I
It
didn't mean to cut you off. I just go ahead.
No. It's fine. And it's awesome. We love that aspect of it. It was part of the vision, and the fact that it's reality. And we just laugh about it because it's like, you know, I'm a kid that grew up on a farm in Alabama in a county that was 70% white and 30% black, and then me. And so it's like,
Mhm.
who in the world am I to be here leading a international church? And yet I think that's just how God works sometimes. He's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And so it's been a lot of fun. Been difficult, as anybody knows who plants a church, and we've learned a lot of what to do and what not to do along the way.
Very good. So in that story, the last several guys that we've had on here for this conversation, we've talked about the length of time between moving to the city they feel called to plant a church in and their actual public services. And most guys have been very quick. And I think of the last three conversations that have been very like just mere months between moving there and starting it. My own our own story. We moved in May. We started weekly services in September. But you had a year. Is that am I hearing that's right? You moved and had a full year at least between
Yeah,
arriving there.
almost 11 months.
Man, I think that's so. Let me just ask you this, and this isn't related necessarily to the topic we're pressing into, but what were you doing during those 11 months? So you showed up, and what's happening for a year?
Yeah, we broke it up into phases that I felt like worked well for us and for our team. And so um, I'm trying to remember the phases right now. It's been a while. We had three of them. So the first phase was just build relationships. And so that was 5 months long. And we would meet with our team pretty much every Sunday night that moved with us.
Did
And
the whole team arrive at the same time?
three of the families got here in October.
Okay.
And then one family got here in December. So 2 months later.
So most everyone was there together. Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. So we focused in on, hey, we don't know anybody here in the city. We got to build relationships as fast as possible. And so, we located things like volunteering, neighboring, and then I think we just called the third category interacting, like in public. And so we would literally meet in our living room and have a whiteboard, and we would go around the room and be like, all right, who did you meet this week, and how did you advance a relationship? And so if anybody was peeking in the window, it would look like really creepy and cultish, you know.
I do know because I meet in the living room every week. So.
Because we're writing the names of people on the board, and we had this diagram, but it really, I think, held our team accountable to like, hey, this is what we're here for. We're here to meet people and we're spend time with people.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the first phase, was just relationships. And then we transitioned to a little more public, kind of that middle phase. I think we called it grow the launch team. And that's where we were really trying to lean in on some of those relationships, invite them into what we were doing. And then the third phase was called the launch. And that was really the public phase where we're, doing events and we're marketing and we're doing preview services and that kind of thing. So that was,
how long is that middle phase, that second phase?
I want to say that was 3 months, 4 months. And we kind of looked at it as, we said, okay, they're not phases that are ending. It's like layers, right?
Well, right. Yeah, that makes the most sense. So the launch, where you're actually doing your advertising, showing up at events, preparing for this public service, how long is that?
So that'd be 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and
Yeah,
we did 4 preview services, and yeah, so
do people show up at your preview services?
Yeah, they did.
Gosh,
Yeah.
you're such a jerk. So,
but but then again, we're in really different contexts. I'm
I
not.
know. I was just on. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast, "Pastors to Pioneers." It's about guys that have been traditional ministry, but now are pursuing maybe more movement style stuff. I was just interviewed on there today, and we talked about. I shared that story. Like no one came to my preview services. No one.
Yeah.
And it's just every time I have to retell that story, it makes me sick to my stomach.
Oh, I'm sure you still feel that, right? Yeah.
Okay, so you got preview services, you're launching, you're in the school the whole time, right? You haven't. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And now you've been there for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those public services, you've been there 8 public services for 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking just earlier, and I love this. You had all kinds of things looking back on that season of ministry you would do differently. Some of those, brother, we're going to have to circle back to, because I think those are necessary conversations. But one that you hit that I think transcends both like your personal life, your home life with your kids, your wife, as well as what's going on with the ministry, was just about healthy rhythms.
Yeah.
And you said, I didn't put healthy rhythms in place, or I didn't maintain healthy rhythms. So I'd love to explore that a little bit, what you mean by a healthy rhythm, what you were doing, like maybe even, so clearly you had there's some structure to the time leading up to launch. There's structure in your life, but maybe not healthy structure in some ways. There's some things missing in that structure. I'd love to talk through that a little bit. So just define for us kind of what you mean by healthy rhythms, and then let's just kind of pick apart the different spheres in which some things were missing and how you would do it differently now. Because again, you're 8 years removed from some of those things. So what would we do different looking back? But go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, again, you know how this goes. It's hard when you don't know what you don't know. Right.
Right. If you knew better, you would have done it better the first time.
Exactly. And, what I knew going in was, I knew it was going to be a lot of work. I knew I wanted to protect my family. I had heard that enough from guys to say, don't cheat your family, right? Don't cheat your wife, don't cheat your kids, the time and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew that. And so, but you're trying to wrestle with, okay, I have to launch this church, and I feel like I'm on a clock,
Yeah.
You know, this clock is going in my head, and we have to get it to a certain point of sustainability. And so,
Let
you
me
know,
let me
go ahead.
interrupt you. Do you feel like was that because a couple other guys have mentioned that same kind of metaphor? Is that outside pressure? Is that what you feel like the clock, like people expecting you to do something, or is that internalized, like you just put that on yourself, or what do you mean by that?
I think for me, the outside pressure is definitely there, but maybe not to the degree of I'm just looking at like, okay, I know the resources, the funds that I've raised are
Okay.
limited. I know, you know, momentum's sake, we need to get some momentum going, and we got a timeline to do that in, right?
Yeah.
Or it's going to kind of fizzle out. And so, and so you're trying to stack, like, okay, we got to stack a lot of time and work against this to make this go, right? And obviously we need the Lord, but I've also got to do a lot of work. And I think, I mean, and I grew up on a farm, so I grew up with that work ethic and kind of the mentality of like, okay, well, you just got to do more. And so I think for me, I look back and I don't think I cheated my family as far as time. But in my mind, it was like, okay, I'm not going to cheat my family, but I will just work extra. You know,
Hmm.
after everybody goes to bed, I'll stay up and I'll work. And I don't need a day off. I can just keep working on those days. Like Sabbath, like that was for Old Testament people, right? And so I think that was more or less the thing, like late nights, early mornings. And I was here, I wasn't neglecting my family, but man, I just look back on that. I'm like, I was a tired guy
Yeah.
during that time. And um and since then, like just you know, I you unpack a lot of that. I've done counseling
Yeah.
and still do counseling on a regular basis. And one of the things I learned about myself, the counselor's like, you know, I don't think you embrace limits very well.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what is that? You know, embrace a limit. Like, why would you embrace a limit? You're supposed to break out of limits.
Come
And
on, man.
so, anyway, all of that, just some mentality that I had. Yeah, I don't even know if I'm explaining that
No,
well.
that makes sense because I was see because you moved when you moved, you had your children with you already.
Yeah,
And I don't think you've said it yet. Forgive me if you have. You have three kids right now,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Three
three
kids.
kids.
Okay. So we moved, did not have children yet. I've got two right now. The audio of this is probably gonna be messed up because there's one screaming in the background right now. I don't know if you can hear. Um, and so I feel like I drug my wife into some of that busyness. It sounds like you didn't. Is that, I mean, was Lauren and involved in any of that busyness, that activity, or is that just you running and gunning on your own?
I think she was involved to a degree, but I think she was shielded to some of it because she was focused on the kids a lot. So
See, and I think that's, and again, I'm talking about unhealthy rhythm. So I know there's things you wish you did differently, but I think that's good that she wasn't like forced to just,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I drugged my wife Grayson through a bunch of stuff. Like we were, like we gotta show up at this 3-day event, and you gotta be there with me, and we gotta go out here, and we gotta,
yeah,
and it is you talk about being tired. You look back on it, and man, just why? Just like why? Just
yeah,
stirring up activity, and I feel like part of that in my mind was a fear of man,
sure.
like because I did have you talk about funds, like there are people giving,
Hmm.
and so no one told me you better get out there and start a church immediately. No one, it was self-imposed, but it was self-imposed because I was afraid of what they thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And so it just going and going and going. Of course, I didn't have kids, and so we hit the ground running immediately. We didn't. Our launch service was September of the same year. We moved in May. We launched in September, which is dumb. Like I'm glad to hear you waited a year, like 11 months. Like that's awesome. Um, but yeah, it was to our detriment physically, emotionally, spiritually. So okay, you're running,
yeah,
working, you've got this, like I've got to produce, I'm doing stuff, I've got
yeah,
time, why not do it? I've got some, you realize your funds are limited, they will
yeah.
burn up if you don't start doing something. Um, but in that you did not have in place healthy rhythms. And
Yeah.
so talk through maybe some different spheres of where you started to see, again, maybe not in the moment you didn't see it.
Yeah.
You're looking back on it now, bro.
Yeah.
So talk about the spheres of your own well-being,
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, like you, but then you and your wife, Lauren, the
Yeah.
marriage, and then you and your kids as a father, and then
Yeah.
just the ministry. Because I think sometimes one of the things I feel like I did differently in that, did terribly, not differently, in that early stage of ministry was taking so much of it on myself,
Yeah.
like, and that wasn't healthy. Like, there wasn't a healthy, like, taking a, you just talk about Sabbath and you joking a Sabbath, like giving breaks and giving other people opportunity to step up. So maybe just pick whichever one of those you feel like is, like, start with whatever one you feel like you can speak to the most directly, but let's just kind of go through those different areas of life and like what you were doing,
Yeah.
maybe what needs to be done.
I think, um, you know, like I said, even though I wasn't neglecting my family as far as time, I don't think, um, it was hard to be fully present when I was there because I was carrying so much,
Yeah.
and working on so much that it's like, all right, I'm with my kids, but I'm thinking, all right, I got to do this thing. I got to do this thing afterwards. And so, I wasn't fully present. I wasn't fully there emotionally. I look back and there was a lot more stress that I was handling, that I probably didn't have to. Like, for instance, if I had delegated better,
Yeah.
if I had brought other people into some of the things I was working on, and some of that was honestly, it was fear of failure. It's like, okay, I just got to outwork everything. Like, that was just my solution. Like, okay, I just got to outwork. It was fear of, not trusting other people, like letting them fail to a certain degree. I think I was so afraid of failure that I didn't, like, all right, I can't trust this person to do this to the level that I need them to do it. So I just got to do it. Where now
Man.
I look back now and I go, maybe they would have done it at whatever it was, 70% the first time. And maybe I could have just spent a little time coaching them and they could have got to as good as me or better. But it was just like, that was in my mentality at the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so, not delegating, not trusting people, fear of it just keeps pushing you forward. I got to do more. 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 And then I feel like when something does succeed, it's almost like, if it fails, then you got to work harder. But if it succeeds, you got to work harder. So it's
Because you
just
got
like,
to top it. You got to keep going.
yeah,
Okay, so let's pause here a second because we're talking about ministry kind of patterns and rhythms here.
yeah,
So delegation is an incredibly hard thing to do. I feel like if you've not been, because I remember in this, because I was doing everything and it didn't delegate it, didn't recognize it in the moment. I don't know if you recognize that was happening in the moment. I didn't. I did not.
no, I
I
would have said I was, but
but it was happening
yeah,
when we made the transition from multi-site to the house church network. One of the things we were touting as we were preparing for it was like, we're going to equip you and release you and all this kind of stuff. And then when we actually came time, if the buildings were gone, we're in the house church network. I realized I was still trying to show up at everything. Like, I didn't know how to delegate. And
hmm,
so it was not just this unhealthy rhythm. It was almost like this character flex. It's something I just never had learned to do. And
hmm,
so I think knowing to do that from the outset is key. So okay, maybe let's explore that a little bit. You've gone with the team. So say some other brother's coming to a city, he's got a team of people, or maybe he's building a team of people. I mean, what's something he can do right off the bat that would help him instill that rhythm of delegation? Because I think that is a really sticky point.
yeah. I don't know how to fully know the answer, but it's
I don't.
it's something that you have to keep in tension, right? Like, not like arguing tension, but like in, like a rubber band in
Yeah,
tension. Because I've seen people go too far both ways. Like, I've seen people be like, "Hey, you're in charge of this," and they just give it to them, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, no, 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 that person's not the person to lead that.
yeah.
um,
No, yeah,
but then there's the other side of just hoarding everything. And so it's a dance that I think you learn over time of, like, okay, I'm going to give this person a little bit, then I'm going to give them a little more.
yeah,
And I think for me, it goes back to that fear of failure. Like I had to get beyond that a little bit to be like, you know what? It's okay if not every aspect of every event succeeds. Um,
Yeah.
and so if somebody does it and it goes 75% well, that's a win. And we'll review and they'll do it better next time. So I don't know. I think it's just, yeah, probably being open and honest with your team about here's what all has to be done. And here's what I feel comfortable about doing in a healthy way. And here's where I need some help. And it's probably a conversation I don't know. I just didn't feel, I mean, maybe it was pride that kept me from having that conversation, but I think having that conversation in a real way with your team would be good.
Yeah. I have a good friend who's serving with E3 Partners. It's a disciple making ministry, and he says to me, because again, this is something I've had to learn recently. Like I wasn't doing it early on in the ministry, but giving people responsibilities, like it's like fertilizer. Like it gives them you just said it. It gives you, even if they did just 75%, there's still a chance to grow in it.
Yeah.
And so you give those things away. And people will step into it
Yeah.
and grow through it. And so again, we're talking about healthy rhythms. It's not taking everything on ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's inviting other people in.
And
And
if I can interject another thing that with me that was probably contributed or did contribute to all this was if I did delegate, okay, so I'd say, let's say I'm like, all right, I delegate, then I pick something back up, something new. It's like,
yeah,
okay, I gave that up, now I can do something new and I can add. And I just, this mentality of just add more, 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 more. And man, I think we got to have a growth mentality, but there's also a point of knowing what's sustainable, healthy growth too.
well, it goes back to what's really important in this particular season, right? Because just picking stuff up to say I've got a full calendar, a full schedule, I'm
Yeah.
doing something, I'm busy.
Yeah.
I mean, delegation, I think at its core should be freeing you up to do what only you can do.
Yeah.
And again, that's something I'm learning now, and not I've
Mhm.
been again Utah more than a decade, and I'm guilty of that. You hand something off, and now I'll just pick some other random mess up.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily contributing to the mission or the vision or the extent.
Yeah.
It's just something else. And yeah, that's a good observation. That's good self-awareness of shouldn't have been doing that, just picking stuff up just for the
Yeah.
sake of picking it up. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it took me a long time to fully learn what I was doing. Honestly, for me, it happened in the pandemic is when my aha moment came, and that was, I was running, you know, I was doing 100. I was at 110% when the pandemic hit. Okay, so I had
Mhm.
no margin, no extra room for adding anything else. And when the pandemic hit, um, all of a sudden it was like, all right, we got to completely shift everything because we couldn't meet indoors, and so it was like um, I needed to go up to 150%, right,
Wow.
in my
Yeah.
mind, and that's what I tried to do, and what ended up happening was I was just getting it. I was exhausted, and it was around the same period of time. It's kind of funny how God works. Like I was reading a book and they're talking about Sabbath. Listen to a podcast, they're talking about Sabbath. My own Bible reading, I feel like God's talking to me about Sabbath. And then this leader in our church just calls me out of the blue one day and goes, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I don't know if this is off or not. I just feel like God put this on my heart and I'm supposed to say this to you." And I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "I just think you have too much on your plate and you need to figure out what it's going to look like to have a healthy rhythm of like a Sabbath in your life."
Mm.
And I'm going, "Who have you been talking to?" And man, I think back to that moment, like I almost cried when he said that because I was tired. I was exhausted. I was feeling that. And the Lord was speaking me that. And so to have a brother in Christ say, "I think this is what God told me to tell you."
Wow.
Like, what do you say to that? You can't say, well, you're completely off. And
Right.
so,
It's been coming from all these different places already.
yeah.
Wow.
So,
Okay. So you didn't. So I'm assuming, well, maybe that's a bad, maybe I shouldn't.
oh
Did
boy.
you, I'm gonna say maybe I shouldn't assume. Did you heed that counsel from that brother, what you're hearing God speak to you from his word, from this book, from this, like, what happened in that aftermath?
You know what? Honestly, I did. I was reading, oh man, what is the book? John Mark Comer's book on, what is it? The Elimination of Hurry.
Oh,
And so I did. I went home and me and Lauren talked. And I'm like, look, and I don't remember how the exact conversation went, but I was like, look, he called me today and this is what I've been reading. And I think we got to start thinking about implementing Sabbath. And we did. And it took us a while to figure out exactly what that looked like and to, I feel like, get to a point where we were actually practicing it well. But I will say, probably out of anything that happened during the pandemic, that was by far the best thing that happened in our life. And it came through a hardship and through God speaking to us. But it's still a rhythm that we carry forward today, and it's so life giving for
yeah.
us. And I'll say, like, to the church planner who's like, okay, whatever, because that was me. Like, I don't need the whole Sabbath thing where you don't do work for a day or whatever. Um, I would just say what's happened is, because when you say you're going to do that, then there're just certain things you can't do. Like, I don't do as much work as I used to, and because there's a whole day that's missing. But it's amazing, like, the work has continued because it actually forced me to give some of that work to other people,
Yes.
and they're not burnt out over it. I'm not burnt out over it. And I actually get a day with the Lord and with my wife and with my family, and it's replenishing. And so it's just kind of funny. Like, God kind of knows what he's talking about, right?
Well, and I think that's so healthy because it changes your perspective on the work, right? On the ministry. Because
Yeah.
you and I were talking about that just before we started recording. Like, there was there was times I was just plugging away, just like you just do it. Like, that's what I feel. Again, if you're a church planter, you are probably very driven, very
Yeah.
entrepreneurial
You
anyway.
have to
You're
be.
just going. You gotta be, yeah. And but then to have space where you're not doing anything and to see the work continue without you
Yeah.
is a it can be humbling. It can hurt your ego a little bit, but on the backside, I think it's a very healthy perspective on, like, oh, this isn't about me, this isn't mine, this is Christ, right? And I remember a vacation a few years ago. um First time I didn't take my laptop, didn't check my email, just really, because usually I'm trying to do work while we're at the
Oh
beach.
yeah.
Yeah. Why? Well, I could do, I could telecommute, and so, but handed everything off, and then, like, even in my absence, man, there was someone that got saved and baptized, a new group started, all this, and you're like, oh my goodness, they did this without me.
Yeah.
It's just like, it is an incredible thing, and so it is, I think, both sides of it. It's a healthy leveling up of everybody, and I think that's tremendous. So maybe just for practical sake, purposes, practical suggestions, how does your Sabbath look now? Like, how are you actually rolling that? It's easy to say I Sabbath, but what does that mean? What do you?
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, for us, Fridays work really well for us. Saturdays are busy with kids and, errands and that kind of thing. But for us, Fridays worked really well. And so, what we try to do is, all right, let's get everything done Thursday that we need to get done, whether it's, get the house clean for my wife so that she's not, worried about different things or errands that we need to run, or, sermon prep, all that kind of stuff. Try to get that done before Friday so that that's not there. And sometimes it doesn't have, like, sometimes it's like, okay, the sermon's not finished. It's like, all
Right.
right, well, it's, I'm going to put the finishing touches on it on Saturday, and it just is what it is. But then for us, Friday, we kind of, like, all right, what are some key things we want to do? Like, all right, we want to worship on that day. We want to make sure that we're delighting in God on that day, and that means like in His creation and good food. I can't remember who it was I read behind, and they're like, you know what, it's okay to really delight in God and worship Him by enjoying, going on a hike. And one of the things for us, like we always try to do something that's restful and relaxing on that day. And we always try to eat something good. And
Oh
like,
man.
and I'm serious, like it almost sounds, I don't know, weird, but there's so many times, more so on that Friday than any other time, where I'm eating something and I'm seriously not joking, but I'm going, like, Lord, like this is amazing.
Thank
And
you so much for this
yeah,
food.
God, thank you for giving us money to buy this, and thank you for letting us delight in the things that you've made and your creation. And it's just really a time that allows us to stop and go, you know what, God, this is awesome, and you're awesome, and your world keeps spinning without us, and you want us to enjoy this stuff. And so every one of them for us looks different. We just kind of have a rule: we're going to delight in God. We're going to rest. We're not going to feel guilty for not getting anything done.
Yeah.
And basically, if if we don't want to do it on that day, we're not going to do it. If it feels like work, like my wife sometimes likes to get out in the yard and plant some flowers, and she's like, "I'm going to do that until it feels like work, and then I'm done." And so that's what we do, and it's
Nice.
just been a really life giving day for us.
Good deal. So do you so you've got this Sabbath built in
Yeah,
that gives you break from ministry. It's created the necessity to delegate some things in the ministry. You're unavailable.
yeah.
Is there anything, so again, going back to rhythms, just as we're kind of maybe tying this stuff together, is there any other rhythms you've instilled um with either Lauren, like your wife, just you and her, or with the
Yeah.
kids, or even rhythms like on your church calendar? You're like, hey, we weren't doing this necessarily on the front end, but
Mhm.
right now we're wanting to make sure we give space. These are things that we as a church give priority to. Anything like that kind of goes into that cyclical rhythm?
I think probably for us, there have been more things that have been taken off
Okay.
because there was too much, and and I think that all ties in. The cool thing about it is that I feel like the Sabbath has bled over into other areas of my life, like taking that one day and being like, okay, nope, we're drawing boundaries around this. Um, it's taught us this principle that sometimes you just can't add something else.
Yep.
Sometimes you just can't do something else. You can only do what God's given you the capacity to do in the moment.
Hmm.
And so because of that, I think it's helped us with our church calendar go, okay, you know what? We can't do all of these things, but what's the one thing or two things that we should do? And so I
Yeah.
think there's been a little bit of a scaling back on things. Not that we're trying to, not go forward in the mission, but I think we're able to probably hone in on things more so that we want to do. And I think our church calendars healthier. It's true what they say, like your church is going to become who you are. And if you're an exhausted pastor, you're going to lead an exhausted church. And
Hmm.
so I feel like we're probably in a better rhythm as far as our calendar as a church.
Right on. Maybe again, thinking just practically, what are some things that you feel like may fell off? The things you didn't add, things you
Mm.
didn't add to the calendar, even in recent years. There's like things you could not. I'm not saying it's bad. Not
Yeah.
saying it's not,
Yeah.
but just like, hey, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. Man, just the first one that comes to my mind when you say that was a great event. And I feel like our church, we're pretty good at doing events. Like that's just one of our giftings. We're good at that. I don't know if that's a spiritual gifting, but maybe hospitality. But just because you're good at it doesn't mean you always got to do it at the same level. And so, like one of our first years here, we were going to do a community, kind of like a VBS in the summertime for kids, but more of an outreach oriented VBS. And
Okay.
my mentality has always been like, if you're going to do it, like try to do it big, even if it's the first time, do it big. And
Put it
so,
up.
yeah. And our very first one. We did a community and it turned out great. It was awesome. We had 120 kids the first night, 150 the next night, and then 200 on the final night. And I mean, it was awesome. There were people from India, from the Middle East, and
They came all the way from India to be there with you in California.
they moved and came. So
Wow, man, what an incredible.
but it was exhausting.
Yeah.
And honestly, that was one of those things that it was hard because it ended up so well, but at the same time, we really didn't have the manpower to pull off an event like that at that time. And so we did it one more year and we had some help from another group that was visiting. But after that, it hurt my heart and my soul. But we took that off the calendar because it was killing our team.
Yeah.
And if I had it to do over, and it hurts to say because I don't want to go low on anything, but it's like I would have just started, like we've done the same thing. Let's do it with 30 or 50 kids and really love on them and their families well.
Yeah.
And grow into it, as opposed to like, let's just send out thousands of invites and blow it up from day one. So anyway, that would just be one example from.
No, that makes sense. I was a previous episode. We were talking to that brother in Pennsylvania, Matt, and he talked about programming and doing it like he was a much bigger church. He comes in starting from scratch, him and his family,
Yeah.
and then trying to do it up like it's, like they're running 1,000 people. And I mean, that's exciting. But
Yeah.
like you just said, it's not sustainable. Like it's exhausting. And so it's okay to recognize the season you're in.
Yes.
And say, this isn't something we're doing right now. Like this is not something we can give time and energy to. It doesn't mean you won't ever pick it up again.
No.
It's just like this isn't where we're at.
And again, it's about embracing the limits of, what's God put in your hands to do, what's He giving you the ability to do in that season, and going from there.
Man, that's a good word. Okay, let's wind this down. So we've talked about healthy rhythms, particularly in ministry. You talked about Sabbath, and you talked about the delegation. You talked about getting that time with your family, your kids. You talked about taking things off the calendar, not necessarily just because you delegated. We got to add stuff. Any other practical advice, counsel to someone who's just starting? Maybe they're moving to Irvine. You've been there 8 years already. Like something you tell them on this topic of rhythms, just before we wrap up here.
The last thing that comes to mind is just the preaching rhythm. I think making sure you're scheduling preaching breaks for yourself. We both come out of similar backgrounds, in the South and traditional churches where, I think a lot of pastors preached Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And so, I'm in our church, Sunday morning, we have service and then we have small groups during the week. So I was really preaching one time, but still putting a lot of time into those sermons. And when you're preaching back to back to back to back to back, there just comes a point where you're not fresh anymore. For me, it's like, and about 4 times, then I need someone else to speak. So that keeps me fresh. I had an older pastor just a month ago tell me, he's like, yeah, I think probably, honestly, you need to have somebody once a month. And I'm like, okay. So having someone else speak, whether it's, local pastors, and that's one thing that's been helpful for us. If you have someone on your team, that's great. Or local pastors, having them speak. Because here's the reality, especially when you're planting, there's so much more to do than sermon prep. It's like, if you're not prepping a sermon, you're using that time, you're planning something, you're leading something.
Absolutely. So I remember when you launched, when we were living. I remember I was in the basement. I called you, or you called me or something, and you said, man, you talked about, well, now I got to get a sermon ready every week because like all of a sudden there's this new responsibility. And I mean, that may beg the question of in that early stages, how much time needs to be going to that versus,
Yeah.
the delegation, handing it off. It raises people up locally in your body, man, expose them to the broader kingdom if you're inviting others in. But I think that's a great piece of advice is don't feel like you've got to run. Now I'm doing everything just because we launched, just because we had a grand opening service. It's all on me now.
Yeah,
It's not. So
exactly.
man, anything else, brother? I'm going to link to the Grace City Church website. Is there anything else you want me to point people to that I can throw in the show notes? Anything else going on that you want to plug right here before I close
Um,
this out?
I don't know if you want to share that book by John Mark Comer. If you've not read that, if people have not read that, I think that's
What's the title? What was?
The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Yes, I made it. Okay, you said it earlier. I will put that in the show notes. I think that'd be a great resource for someone thinking through this very thing.
It's a
So
good reminder for sure.
good deal. All right. Well, we hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a rating or review that helps other people find it. I'd also ask that you just share it. You pass it along to, man, your team. If you're a church planter, if you know a church planter, I mean, give it to them. This is a great conversation starter. And we would just love to be helpful. Again, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, to go through some of the stuff, the struggles, the questions that even Stephen and I here have talked about today. Let our mistakes and our experience maybe bring you a couple steps forward. Thank you so much. My name is Logan Wolf. I've been joined today by my friend Stephen Kimbrell. He's a pastor, a church planter in Irvine, California. And this has been Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million part series.